Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard, Parshat Miketz. And what we're going to do tonight is in Fruits of the Orchard, there are 4 articles. And we're going to do, hopefully, all 4 articles with a connection to Hanukkah in each one of them. It is the first night of Hanukkah here already in Eretz Yisrael. It's Hanukkah Sameach. And most of you very soon will be lighting candles. And we'll see that there's very, very deep connections between this Parsha and Hanukkah. Okay, so the first Torah that we have in Fruits of the Orchard is called Potent Willpower. And this I heard from Reb Shlomo in the name of the Ishbitzer Rebbe. The way the storyline is given in the Torah, the Parsha begins with, after 2 years, meaning an additional 2 years that Yosef spent in jail, according to tradition, because he a little bit depended and had faith in the butler as the one who would get him out of jail. And so therefore, for anyone else, it wouldn't have been thought of anything, but someone on Yosef's level, there was just a little bit where he wasn't trusting completely in Hashem. He put his trust in this human being, the butler. So it starts, Miketz Shanatayim Shanim, after 2 years. Shanatayim Yamim. And then it says, Pharaoh dreamed. And these are the 2 famous dreams of Pharaoh, and he can't find anyone to interpret them. So the sages say they did interpret the dreams for him, but he didn't. Not so much he didn't like the interpretations. Deep down inside, he knew that those interpretations were not the correct one. And then the butler speaks up and tells him, when I was in jail, there was this, he's called a Hebrew slave, and he interpreted my dream and the baker's dream. So that's how the story line begins, the pshat, the simple understanding. But the Rebbe from Ishbitzer said an amazing thing. According to tradition, Yosef Tzaddik came out of jail on Rosh Hashanah. So in other words, the dreams of Pharaoh were Rosh Hashanah night. And he gives over that it's not so much that Pharaoh had a dream, and then the butler mentions Yosef, and therefore he's brought out of jail. The Ishbitzer said what happened was on Rosh Hashanah, Yosef's been in jail for 12 years. 12 years. And the whole time he totally believes in Hashem. He knows that there must be a reason that he's there. And as it said in the past Parsha, everything he did succeeded, and the head of the jail turned literally all the affairs of the jail over to Yosef. Everything he did succeeded. So he's thinking, Hashem, you know best, you know why I'm supposed to be here. But after 12 years, on Rosh Hashanah night, Yosef cried out to Hashem, Rabbona She'olam, Master of the world, when am I going to get out of here? I need to get out of here. And Paro then had his dreams. So this is like a very different way of seeing the storyline. Here, as I said, we read it as if Pharaoh has dreams and Yosef's brought out of jail to interpret them. Here, the Ishbitzer was saying, Yosef prays to Hashem, I have to get out of jail. I've been waiting Ribono Shel Olam, you have to open the gates for me. And then Pharaoh dreams. So this is telling us something very, very deep about our possibilities, about what's called ratzon, will. There's an expression that says, Ein davar omed lifnei ratzon. Nothing stands in the way of will. So we know from our own lives, obviously, we can't control everything that happens to us. Things happen. And then we're in a position of dealing with them, reacting to them, trying to make the best of them. But in large part, we create our own reality through the force of our will. And we know in physics today, one of the most important ideas is the role of the observer in any measurement, any experiment. Is the observer is not a passive part of the reality as it's being formed, that the observer, it affects and influences the outcome of any reality. And so this is in pure physics, but it's so much more so in the spiritual world, where, as for example, the Baal Shem Tov taught, think good and it will be good. In other words, as I said, it's not, we're not under an illusion that we can control everything about our lives. But we do have to acknowledge that a good part of the reality that we live in on our own little personal world is a result of the power of our will. And we see this very much in the slavery in Egypt, where in Parshat Shemot, it explains how we were put into slavery and all the taskmasters and the cities that we built and the terrible conditions. And then at one point, it says that Bnei Yisrael cried out to Hashem. And the very next verse, it says, and God heard and he knew. And then he appears to Moshe in the burning bush and appoints him as the leader to bring Israel out of Egypt. So there, all the commentaries see the juxtaposition that until we cried out from the depths of our heart, we were stuck in slavery. But at a certain point, that cry pierced the heavens and set in motion the redemption from Egypt. So it says in the Gemara, that Tzaddik decrees and Hashem fulfills. And Hashem decrees, and the Tzaddik has the power to cancel a decree. Now, we might think it's different. We might think God decrees and the tzaddik fulfills. Now that's obviously true, but here the sages wanted to tell us that the power of prayer, the power of a tzaddik, of a righteous individual, and we all have a point of the tzaddik within us, that with the force of our will, in great measure, we can create the reality that we live in. So this is obviously a very, very important idea, that so many people, in a sense, adopt the scenario of victimhood, of being a victim. And there are cases where we are a victim, where fate or destiny or God's divine providence things happen to us. But on the other hand, we all know that we can make things happen. That's what it means. Ein davar omed lifnei haratzon. And it just comes to mind Natan Sharansky. I think everyone knows Natan Sharansky was accused. He's one of the refuseniks in Russia. He was accused of being a spy, of treason. And he spent, I'm not sure, was it 9 years? Something like 9 years in jail, 7 of them in solitary confinement. And he writes in his book that from the moment that he decided that being a Jew was the most important thing to him, and he would not bow to the Russian Empire, he said that I became free. And all the years in jail, they could jail my body, but they could not jail my mind or my soul. Baruch Hashem, eventually he got out, he came to Israel, he was part of many governments, he was the head of the Jewish Agency, and he's still very, very, very active, a very powerful human being. So now, as I said in the beginning, every idea tonight from Fruits of the Orchard, I want to connect to some aspect of Hanukkah. And here, there's an obvious connection with the Maccabees. At the time of the story of Hanukkah, the Greek Empire was the largest empire the world had ever seen, as far as how much of the land mass they had conquered. After that, there were other great empires, but that was the largest empire that really had conquered so much of Europe, all the ways to almost India, Northern Africa, and that became the Greek Empire. And here we have little Judah, which is like a drop of oil on the map, rose up because the Maccabees felt that Torah observance was in true danger, that if the tide was not turned like very quickly, then Torah could have been, in a sense, wiped out. It's a known thing that a large amount, even a majority of Jews had assimilated into Greek society, Greek culture. And for the Maccabees, it really was a complete force of will to rise up against the Greek Empire and fight for the continuity of Torah and the continuity of sovereignty in Eretz Israel. And of course, the message of the Maccabees, the example of the Maccabees, replayed itself in the establishment of the state of Israel. There's absolutely no doubt that our era, the last century, so many of the historical and political realities were almost mirroring the realities of when the Maccabees rose up against the Greek Empire. And so that's why in Israel, and really everywhere, even among many, many Jews that don't observe very much, lighting Hanukkah candles is a big thing. And so, especially today, when, as I said, so many of the factors, so much of the reality of our historical reality is very, very much like the time of the Maccabees. So here we're connecting it to the whole story of Hanukkah, that really it started off with one family. The revolt began with one family. And they decided, like, the buck stops here. We have to rebel. We have to fight back, and we have to fight for our ideals and for the continuity of the Torah in Eretz Israel. So here we could see a deep connection between Hanukkah and the idea of the potent willpower. And I just want to share, there's no right or wrong here, but many times we tend to pray in a sense from a very, I'll call it passive, but not in a negative way, where we say to God, I don't know exactly what to do right now in my life. I have a couple of alternatives. I'm not sure what is best. I'm not sure what you think is best for me. So please show me the way. Please show me the way. And then there are other times, and that works. It works. That we'll get signs. We'll get thoughts. Circumstances in our life will start to appear that will direct us in one way or another. But then there's sometimes, like Yosef for 12 years was, I must be here for a reason. Hashem, you know best. I trust that when you feel it's time for me to come out, you'll bring me out. But then there's other times in life where it's almost as if Hashem is saying to us, I'm waiting to hear what you want. Like, you're asking me to show you a sign, but I need a sign from you. What, in your heart of hearts, what do you think is best? What do you want to do? Now, there's no right or wrong here, and sometimes this strategy works and sometimes the other. But we should both keep it in mind that they're both legitimate, that sometimes we ask God, like, reveal to me what you want me to do. And other times we have to realize, in a sense, God is waiting to hear from us what we really want to do. Okay, so that was the first article in Fruits of the Orchard this week. The second one is called the interpretation of dreams. So here, I want to just concentrate on one idea about dreams, just one idea, and that is what it says in the Talmud, that dreams go after the mouth. What does that mean? Dreams go after their interpretation. And what is the proof text that the sages bring? Well, it's from our Parsha. Because when the butler is explaining to Paro how he had a dream, and the butler had a dream, and there was this Hebrew slave, and he says, for those who want to look at it, it's chapter 41, verses 12 and 13, Mem Aleph, Yud Bet, and Yud Gimel. And he says like this, V'sham itanu nar ivri, there was a Hebrew youngster, Eved l'sar tabachin, he was a servant to Potiphar. The nisperlo, and we told him our dreams, v'yifater lano, and he interpreted them. Et chalamotenu, ish kechalamo patar, each person according to his dream, he interpreted it. But now listen to the next verse. Vayhi kasher patar lano, and according to the way that he interpreted it, kain haya, that is what happened. Oti ashiva kani, I was returned to being your butler. Boto tala, and he was hung. exactly like Yosef said. So the sages bring down from this, we understand what the butler was saying, according to how he interpreted it, that's how it happened. Now, I should mention that this is somewhat controversial because not all of the sages understood that this is so, because we could look at the way that Yosef interpreted the dreams as simply he had Ruach HaKodesh. He had divine inspiration, and he was able to see that these dreams were prophetic. They weren't just stam dreams. He understood they were prophetic. How did he understand? Because his own dreams he knew were prophetic. They had not been fulfilled yet. He dreamt that his brothers would bow down to him. Well, 9 years later, they did come and bow down to him. But he knew the whole time, and it even says about Yaakov, Ve'aviv shamar et hadavar. His father guarded this dream. And Rashi says, what does it mean he guarded it? He anticipated when it would be fulfilled. He understood that these were prophetic dreams. So some of the sages did not 100% understand that a dream goes according to the interpretation, and others did. So it could be just that he was a great dream interpreter, or there is this idea. Now, this is connected to the first Torah we learned about the power of will. And that's why one of the sages, Rav Chisda, said, better a bad dream than a good dream. Why? A good dream, even if we remember it, that was very nice, and we'll forget about it. But if someone has a bad dream, they're not going to forget it so quickly. And it's going to bother them, and it could help them to change and to do tshuva. So Reb Chisda said, better a bad dream than a good dream. But the idea here that we want to pursue is dreams go after the mouth. So there's a beautiful hint to this in Gematria. The Gematria of Chalom is 84. The Gematria of Peh, of the mouth, remember the way the sages say is dreams go after the mouth, meaning the way you interpret it. But the word mouth equals 85. 85 is one after 84. So the Chalom goes after, one after is the Peh, the way it's interpreted. Now, this is such an important concept because I believe I mentioned this just a few weeks ago in Parshat Vayetze, where we learned about dreams. And I mentioned that many writers or songwriters or poets use the idiom that life is like a dream. And in a sense, it really is. It really is. Why? Because our lives go according to the way we interpret it. In other words, things happen to us, or we make things happen, but still, we could interpret the way our life is going as going downhill. No one loves me. I have low self-esteem. I'm a victim. Nothing ever works out for me. God, why is this happening to me? I'll never succeed. We could interpret our life that way, or we could interpret it that maybe I'm going through a few challenges now, but Baruch Hashem, I have so many blessings in my life. I have so many things to be grateful for. So what I'm trying to point out is connecting the first Torah, we learn about the force and potency of will and our ability to interpret our own lives in a positive way. No one forces us to interpret our lives in a negative way. No one forces us to be sad or depressed. It's a choice that we make. It's a choice that we make. And for some people, to be really honest, because of so much advances they've made, many people have chemical imbalances. For most people, that can be alleviated through medication. But we have to choose to go that route. We have to choose to get help. We have to choose to turn to either a professional, a Rebbe, a Rebbitzin, a friend, a parent, whoever. That's the choice that we make. So this idea that dreams go after their interpretation really means life goes after their interpretation. And this is what Nachum Ish Gamzu, famous statement, Gam Zu Latova. Even when things were not going his way, the way he interpreted life was, this will also be for the good. I might not see it right now, but I trust it will be for the good. And like the Baal Shem said, think good and it will be good. So now I want to tell a story and connect it to the Maccabees. This is going back, I believe it was 1977. My wife and I were in Chicago. My wife is from Chicago. And it turns out that Reb Shlomo came to Chicago to do a fundraiser for the Moshav. And it was a small, like a parlor meeting in someone's house. And we went, and there was an incredible snowstorm. And we did this fundraiser, and we barely in the car make it back to the hotel. And it's late, it's 12:30. And Reb Shlomo wanted a cup of coffee. The night was still early for him. So he called room service. They're closed already, it's after midnight. So he goes to the desk and said, where can I get a cup of coffee? And he said, and they said, well, there's a 7-Eleven, but this 7-Eleven is open all night. It's like an all-night thing. I'll never forget this. We went out in the snowstorm. The snow is like halfway up to our knee. We went so Reb Shlomo could have a cup of coffee. So we go, and with a cup of coffee, so you have to get some snacks, right? So I'm going up and down the aisle with Reb Shlomo looking for, some snacks. And I'll never forget this because it was so incongruous. And why I even remember this is amazing. We stopped in a row, and I just happened to look over at what was on the shelf, and I saw something I had never seen before or after. It was pickled pig feet. Now, don't ask me what that even means, but it was a jar of pickled pig feet. And Reb Shlomo turns around to me and he looks at me and he says, do you know why Parshat Miketz always comes either right before Hanukkah or during Hanukkah? And I say, Reb Shlomo, tell me. And he said, because they had a dream and they didn't let go of their dream. And their dream was an independent Israel, in the land of Israel, and living a Torah life. That was their dream, and they would not give it up. And that's why Hanukkah always comes, like I said, either during, right before this parsha of dreams. And it was just so powerful the way he turned to me in total sincerity. And he wanted to give over that idea. So I want to mention, it just came to my head, maybe some of you experience it yourself, but a very, very good friend of everyone in the Moshav who passed away, I lost track, 7, 8, 9 years ago, Mikhail Golem, alav shalom. And he was famous for he was the Gabbai, and he would give Misha Berachs. After someone was called up to the Torah, they get a blessing. And most of the time it's just a standard blessing that everyone gets. But he would turn every Misha Berach into this deep soul searching to give a person the bracha that they needed in their life at that moment. And he used to say all of the time, in complete sincerity, never, ever, 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 ever give up your dreams. And I never forgot that, because it was so sincere when he would be blessing people. And he would always say that, never, ever, ever give up your dreams. Okay, the next Torah in Fruits of the Orchard this week is called Two Perspectives of Brokenness. And this is based on when the famine, if everyone remembers the story, the way that Yosef interprets Pharaoh's dreams is that there will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And his advice to Pharaoh, even though he wasn't asked for advice, and this is also one of Reb Shlomo's favorite Torahs, the idea is when the gates are open, push them open all the way. Here, Yosef, a few hours before, had been in jail for 12 years. And he's now standing before Pharaoh, interpreting his dreams. So you would think he interprets the dream, and then he would be silent and wait to hear what Pharaoh has to say. But instead, he interprets the dream and he immediately starts giving Pharaoh advice that you should appoint someone who will take advantage of the 7 years of plenty and will make storehouses and will take 20% of the grain and store them away. So when the famine comes, Egypt will be prepared. And so this is this concept, even if the door is open a little bit that had been closed, if it gets opened, push it all the ways open. Push it all the ways open. And so the famine comes to Israel as well. And Yaakov says to his sons, I see that there is shever in Eretz Mitzrayim. Now, what does this word shever mean? Now, usually when we hear the word shever, it means broken. And Kabbalistically, the place that this is so important is what's called shvirat hakelim, the breaking of the vessels in the Kabbalistic cosmology of the creation of the world, the breaking of the vessels. Lishbor means to break. but it has another meaning. And that's what Yaakov meant here. He says, I see that there is sustenance in Egypt. Shever also means sustenance. And we see that later in this parsha, when Yosef is appointed to be the second most powerful person in Egypt, and he's called the Mashbir. He's called the sustainer, the one who sustains everyone. And so it's from the same word of shever. So here, and this is not unusual, we'll have a word that the root has opposite meanings. On one hand, it means to break, on the other hand, it means to sustain. So here, many of the commentaries ask, when Yaakov says, I see there is shever in Mitzrayim, that the simple meaning is, I see that there's grain, there's sustenance, there's food. But on a deep level, Yaakov sees the breaking that's going to come. He sees it. But right now, we need food. We need to live. So this is a very, very deep idea. It says that in the Talmud, that God created 974 worlds, and he destroyed all of them. And each one, and he created another world. So the obvious question, then of course we have Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessel. Well, that was just, in a sense, the last of the series of breakings. So the obvious question is, God couldn't get it right? Like, what are we supposed to learn from this? That God had to attempt 974 times to make the world? But here we see, and we see it in nature, we see it all the time, that in the fall, trees lose their leaves. Whatever fruit is not picked, it will rot and fall. And in the course of the fall and the winter and the spring, that provides the sustenance for further growth, because the leaves and the buds and the fruit will get integrated into the soil and will enrich in the soil and provides the food for future growth. So this is a very, very deep way of understanding brokenness. That, again, putting together now all three of our Torahs here about potent willpower, the interpretation of dreams, and now the idea of brokenness, is we all go through our challenges. We all go through obstacles and trials and tribulations. Some bigger, some smaller, some in the realm of health, some in the realm of finance, some in relationships, in midot, in our personality, our emotions. We all go through this constantly. But again, how are we interpreting it? A challenge can break us, or it can thrust us into a situation where we triumph. We can either get broken by trials or triumph through trials. And that's the meaning of this root, shever. So here again, I'm going to connect it to the Maccabees, that there was a tremendous brokenness in Israel, tremendous. But the Maccabees did not allow themselves to be broken. And instead, they used in a sense, being pushed against the wall to propel them to victory. Because in a sense, they had no choice. the shever, the brokenness, forced them to act. Now, again, when we're going through heavy times, many times it's hard to see it, it's hard to feel it. But if we know that under the surface, the salvation is waiting to come out of the brokenness, it would help us get through it. And the last Torah that's in Fruits of the Orchard this week is called Mesirut Nefesh. Mesirut Nefesh means quite literally giving over the soul. Now, in the most extreme application of Mesirut Nefesh, it means to even give up one's life for one's belief. But the more standard and preferable way of Mesirut Nefesh is just giving it our all. That's what Mesirut Nefesh means. When we put our whole being into something. It could be something small, it could be something big. It could be something that takes a minute or 5 minutes or a day or a month or a year, but we put our whole into some goal, some task. So obviously this is a very, very important idea in life in general. But now I want to go to the 43rd chapter, verse 13 and 14. Actually, 14 and 15, really. And this is, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is the brothers go down to Egypt. Yaakov considers Yosef dead. Then, because of the turn of events, the way that Yosef is trying to get them to do tshuva, Shimon ends up in jail, and Yosef says, unless you bring your younger brother that you're telling me that you have, and that you're not spies, don't even come back to me. So they go back to Yaakov and say, Shimon's now in jail, and the ruler says we can't come back unless we produce Binyamin to corroborate our story. And Yaakov refuses. He said he had 2 sons from Rachel, and one he considers dead. And now you want to take my other son, and what, he's going to end up like Shimon in jail also? And he refused. And finally, Yehuda talks him into it, that we have no choice, we have no food left. And he said that everything would be okay. We just have to produce Binyamin, and that will prove that we're not spies. So Yaakov agrees, and he tells him what gifts to bring to the ruler, and he gives him a blessing. And then he ends by saying in verse 15, so he says, Va'ani ka'asher shacholti shachalti. And if I am bereaved, I will be bereaved. Meaning, for Yaakov, this is total Mesirut Nefesh. Maybe I'll never see Binyamin again. But on the other hand, I can't let my whole family starve. So Yaakov goes beyond any preference that he would have, and he's totally Mesirut Nefesh for his family, and says if something happens to Binyamin and I'm bereaved, I'll be bereaved. Now, this idea is, in a sense, repeated approximately 900 years later. 900 years later, in the story of Purim, when Mordechai gets wind of Haman's plot to kill all the Jews, and he goes to Esther and says, you have to do something. You're the queen. And she says, I can't do anything because I'm not called before the king. And you can't just go before the king unannounced. I can't help you. And Mordechai says, well, this is probably the reason that you became the queen, for a moment like this. And if you don't do it, someone else will, but maybe you and your house will be lost. And then Esther said, okay, I'll do it. And she ends with this famous saying, Im avadati, avadati. If I'm lost, I'm lost. Now this sounds very much like Yaakov says. If I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. And so here, in Esther's case, this is like total Mesirut Nefesh. Because when she goes in to see the king, she doesn't know if she's going to come out alive or with her head chopped off. Like, what a chutzpah coming into the king and not announced. You just don't do that. But she says, Im avadati, avadati. So that, of course, is the idea of Mesirut Nefesh. And here we're going to tie it again with Hanukkah, where the whole battle against the Greeks, anyone who joined the battle, especially in the beginning, it was one family. In fact, it was one person. It was Mattatyahu, who, according to the book of the Maccabees, and this is an amazing thing, it's happened twice in a week. In the book of Maccabees, it tells the story of how the Greeks were going around from village to village, forcing people to offer up pigs on an altar. And at that point, up to a majority of Jews had already, in a sense, integrated into Greek society. But the Greeks wanted like total subservience. They came to Modi'in, that's where I live, Mavo Modi'in. They came to the village of Modi'in, which was the home of Mattatyahu and his 5 sons and their families. And they wanted Mattatyahu to offer up a pig, and he refused. And from there, they actually launched the rebellion. It was somewhat spontaneous, but it was really one person was enough. Mattatyahu was the high priest, and of course they wanted him to be an example. And he had total Mesirut Nefesh. His 5 sons followed him. They left Modi'in, and 3 years later, that's when the story of cleansing the temple occurred. But during those 3 years, they lived in caves. They fought against incredible odds. They had all left their families. And in 3 years, they defeated, at the time, the greatest army in the world. And of course, it took total Mesirut Nefesh. But it's even more than that. What a lot of people don't know is that the war against the Greeks lasted for 25 years. When the story of cleansing the temple and the miracle of the oil was only in the 3rd year. At that point, there were 5 brothers. In the course of the 25 years, 4 of the 5 brothers were killed in battle, including Yehuda Maccabee, until only 1 remained, and that was Shimon. And Shimon, after 25 years, was able to make a pact with the Romans, who were just coming on the scene then. They were just coming on the scene. And because of this pact, they were able to push the Greeks out of Israel. And I started to say something, but I got way-tracked here, is in the last week, they found some caves in the Negev. And in the caves, they found a box. And in the box were coins. They established immediately they were from the fighters of the Maccabees. And in the book of the Maccabees, it says how the fighters, many of them escaped to the Negev and took up arms from there. And many of them were killed. Many of them were killed. And so this was considered a huge find, a whole box of coins. And I think there were some manuscripts as well, going back to the actual fighters in the army of the Maccabees. A few days later, this is even more astounding, they were able to interpret, apparently they've had this stone for many, many years. And because of modern technology, they were finally able to decipher it. And it goes back to King Chizkiyahu. This is 2,700 years ago. And in this stone, it has the exact facts as presented in the book of Kings about different things that Chizkiyahu did. And one of the archaeologists said that this may be like the greatest archaeological find in the last 100 years. This is all this week. And it had all these different things that Chizkiyahu did. And it's like as if it's right from the book of Kings. So that's just absolutely amazing. That was just a side point. And so here we see this idea that we've been following this whole evening, the power of ratzon, the power of will, the power of interpreting our own lives in a positive way. Gam zula tova, the idea of sometimes God is waiting for us to dig very deep inside and express to God what we want, what we need. And also the idea of Mesirut Nefesh, and even in circumstances of brokenness, being able to see what we'll call the silver lining or the light that will come from the darkness. That is the theme of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is at the darkest time of the year. The winter solstice is in 3 days, quite literally the longest nights. And the whole idea of Hanukkah is the light that comes from darkness, of turning darkness into light. So we should all have a blessing to be able in our own lives, that the people of Israel should be able also to radiate light, to be or goyim, a light unto the nations. That's why we light the candles publicly, in order to advertise the miracle, because from the time of Abraham till now, our mission has not changed, is to bring light to the world. So I want to bless everyone with a Hanukkah full of light and joy.